it's always good to have to host events with Danny, a friend and a dear friend who I've known for over 15 years. Danny?
Maybe 20.
Oh my God, now you're making me look older. And I think the U.S. UAE Business Council, they add a lot of value because having such platforms, it's important, and that's where we will all share new ideas in the current environment. And I would also like to welcome who you've already met, the head of our global head of global subsidiaries, Saif Malik. It's very important. This is his first trip in the region. So it's also very good that he meets you all as clients in the global subsidiary space. And today we have a very important topic, which is supply chain. And this is a top of our agenda, I guess, for all of you, because we have seen what COVID has disrupted, and this is one of the most important things. And we saw where all the businesses, how they acted in the sense, not looking at the standard supply, basically demand, but looking down more into how to make supply chain more effective and sustainable. And we have very good panelists from Emirates Airline, Mohebi, and Saif Malik from Standard Chartered, and we're all looking forward to hearing them. Danny will be moderating it, so please let's make it as interactive as possible, and let's all benefit from everybody's experience. Thank you very much, and welcome as well. Danny?
Well, Rola, that's a fantastic segue because as everyone that knows me and works with me knows that I always make people pay for their meal by participating in the discussion. So we will have a panel after we've finished lunch and we have dessert and coffee, but the panel discussion is going to be very interactive in drawing others from the audience into the discussion because most of you in the room are experts on the supply chain and what's going on and the crisis in the world right now that we have with the global supply chain. I think it's really important that everyone know who's in the room as they're plating the salad. We have a chance to quickly go around and just say your name, rank, and serial numbers, I would say, from the Defense Department. Your name and your company, if you don't mind. We've heard from Rola. Just shout it out. Go ahead, Alexis, please.
So, Alexis Le Calvet from Accenture.
Ali Al-Janabi Shell.
Nabil Sultan from Emirates Airline. Mohammed Mohebi from Mohebi Group.
Kuljit. Kuljit, I have to. Kuljit is the brand new president, CEO of Boeing in the wider region here. So a warm round of applause for Kuljit in his new position. Go ahead, Nick. Ma'am, go ahead.
From Bloomberg, not working.
Wait, Bloomberg Press? Bloomberg reporters are always working, even when they say they're not. So, not allowed to. So this is off the record and no quotes. Okay, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry. Honeywell, thank you. Thanks. And go ahead, sir. So in any event, thank you all. Some of you came up from Abu Dhabi. We appreciate that. Friends from ADQ that drove up and others. Friends from other companies that have come in actually from around the world. So we really appreciate you being here today. Megan Grigonis, the U.S. Consul General, is going to be joining us in a few minutes as well. So we can't go anywhere in things that we do without the U.S. government. I love their expression, we're the U.S. government and we're here to help. So she'll be here to help as part of the discussion today as well. And she's also brand new on the job. She arrived in August and is doing an amazing job here, getting around in Dubai and getting to know everyone. So I hope you'll take the chance to welcome her and say hello to her as well when she gets here. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's enjoy our meal. You'll see us then come back up in a few minutes for the discussion. And just remember, I will be calling on some of you, if you don't raise your hands, to participate in the discussion. If there is no free meal. Thank you. This is a hybrid event in today's world, post-COVID. Everything that we're trying to do has a hybrid feel to it so that we can draw in a lot more people. I think we learned, especially with your CEO and the CEO of Etihad, when I did the virtual with them back in the spring, we had over 900 people logged in live to watch that presentation. So it just goes to show you how much broader your outreach can be when you take advantage of the new technologies. Thank you. So in any event, I'm going to start the discussion. Standard and Chartered came to us, Rola came to us, her team came to us and said, Danny, we think with the visit of SAFE that it would be a really timely conversation to have discuss the global supply chain and the challenges and what's going on in the global supply chain. It's really, the timing of things in life always matters. I had just had a conversation that afternoon with my sister, who's the Senior Vice President at the Rite Aid Corporation in the United States, and she's responsible for all the imports for Rite Aid from around the world into the U.S. for the U.S. market. Now, if those of you don't know what Rite Aid is, it's a drug company, but it also sells a lot of merchandise, most of which is produced in China. Those freighters, those ships, those container ships, for the last 9 months, year of COVID, are basically backed up on the outside the Los Angeles port, and haven't been able to get to railheads, truck heads, and been able to move around the country and be distributed to the Rite Aid stores. My sister, sort of middle of the road politics, decided to vote for President Biden because he was going to fix some of these problems in her mind. Pete Buttigieg, our current Secretary of Transportation under the president, was my student at Harvard, and she knows this, and she would call me literally every day and say, Danny, when are you going to call Pete and tell him to fix these problems and get our products in? I would just say to my sister, I don't have a clue, Lorianne. I'll look into this and see what I can do. And this is when Rola and her team called me in the middle of these conversations. And so I thought, wow, this is a very, very timely conversation. And I thought, given where the U.S. has just passed this massive, infrastructure bill, major amount of spending that's going to go into modernizing a lot of aspects of our supply chain for the future, our transportation network, our telecommunications network. It could not be more timely. And I thought we'd start with Emirates, and at first, and I'd like to sort of hit on, with all of the speakers first, a couple quick points on how COVID rocked your world, how COVID changed the way you do business today. Give me one or two or three, give the group one or two or three major lessons learned from the COVID experience. Sir.
Well, thank you, Danny. I think, that's a mega question for us, being an airline industry. But I mean, of course, the impact and the effect of the COVID on the airline, it has really brought us to our knees. I remember in March 2019 or 2020, was it, where we literally have to suspend the airline. I can tell you, we have faced a lot of challenges throughout the whole airline history in the last 35 years, where we had SARS, we've had the Gulf War, we had all sorts of different challenging times for the airline. But nothing like this ever that one could sort of imagine or comprehend. To suspend the flight literally within days and bring it to complete halt was a major ask. So that's the impact, Danny. And for us, of course, to resurrect from all of that was a huge challenge. Of course, with the pandemic not relenting, and then things were getting, from bad to worse, it wasn't easy. But the interesting part, I think, for us was at the time we very quickly realized how important the supply chain and logistics and the continuation of that means for the livelihood of people at the time. So, forget about the commercial aspect of running the airline or the importance of what have you, but we very quickly realized that we are actually the lifeline for this part of the world. I recall very clearly that we have received phone calls from very high officials in countries around us saying, we're really running out of food in our supermarkets, and unless you do something about it, we will not have food for the population. That's how serious what the matter is. And therefore, very quickly, we have to sort of assemble a team and restart the operation almost instantly. So, there was a planning stage of, okay, what is it that we need to do to get these aircraft flying again, serving all of these different destinations that we operate to. And of course, what is it required for us to sort of kickstart all of that? So while the planning was going on, I remember we had to kickstart some of our passenger aircraft and use them for only cargo. And we've started, I remember, with Kuwait as the first destination. That was our first passenger flight going to Kuwait as cargo aircraft. We had no passenger on that flight. And from then onward, the number grew almost so rapidly in terms of adding more flights, more destinations into, regional destination, whether it be Middle East, Africa, Indian subcontinent, all the way to Europe, Eastern Europe, and the list just continued to grow very rapidly. And before you know it, we were literally operating 90 passenger aircraft, 777s, into different destinations, with almost a network of 100 destinations, purely based on cargo. And of course, a lot of the commodities that we were moving were absolutely essential commodity, life-saving commodities, things like the PPE that was absolutely needed in some countries. The protective gears that hospital wanted, for doctors to treat people. And I think a lot of these sort of essential commodities would become so monetary. And it's funny, but we were moving like these face masks, a full freighter of face masks, literally from China to places in Europe, Middle East, and that's how basic the things are. But I mean, when you think about it, that there's no face mask available in a lot of countries, so we had to get that to these places. Otherwise, the pandemic was spreading like wildfire. So yeah, I mean, that commodity become all of a sudden important, and therefore we need to get it there and get the manufacturers to build all of these things fast enough to get it to the final destination. We've had challenges, sorry.
No, I was going to ask Mohammed to jump in on the point that you made about food, and take my mic because yours is off.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Hand that one back and he'll turn it on for us. But I was going to ask Mohammed to jump in on the aspect of, you made the important point about the food distribution, and Mohebi Logistics is major in the region for doing that. So Mohammed, from your perspective, comment on what were some of the key lessons learned that Mohebi implemented to distribute food around the region and goods and services?
Thank you, Danny. Well, going back a year and a half ago brings back a lot of memories, I have to say. I mean, when the pandemic hit and it was announced all over the world with the governments one by one shutting down and closing off the markets, and then UAE announced the same thing. We, in our logistics front, are considered a frontline worker. We did not have any time to learn, to shut down, to rethink, to re-strategize. The last thing we wanted, and we were also instructed, make sure that the supplies to the market remain and there's no panic in the supermarkets. This was a very big concern to the UAE government and as well to the consumers. At the time, I used to hear stories about what will happen if we go to the supermarkets and there's food out, there's shortages. We were seeing films and videos of that happening in North America and Europe and so forth. So there was a real concern that that might happen here. For us, one of the first things we did, there was practically no guideline at the time, initially from the government. It was a learning process. We took certain literature from the CDC as well as the WHO about how they fight infectious diseases and some of the protocols that they follow. We sat down, it was a laborious process, and we started taking things from different manuals that we felt were practical and doable immediately. So we started creating clusters, bubbles, and so forth. All of that, I'm proud to say that not one single delay happened from our side as far as supply chain goes. We were able to deliver 100%. Due to some of those initial early steps that we took.
Can you come to the U.S. and help advise some of our supply chain?
I think you guys know, and you know it very well. It's the will to do it more than anything else. So from our perspective, it was a very tough, it was a very difficult lesson. We had no time to learn. We had no time to emulate. We had to literally create as we go along. So for us as an Emirati company, I think it was a phenomenal learning experience. And again, it showed to all our multinational companies that we deal with from around the world that, again, the capability is there for UAE companies to be able to execute and learn at the same time, while a lot of the foreign companies were struggling with it. So this is a very proud moment for Emirat. It's a very proud moment for Emirati companies to show capability and flexibility.
Thank you, Mohammed. That's outstanding. Saif, from the standpoint of what Standard & Chartered is doing, I know that you're considered an expert, a leader on some of these topics within the bank. Compare and contrast a little bit from your perspective, some of the lessons learned from looking at your global customer base.
Thanks, Danny, and welcome to the Council General. Thank you for joining us. And also, if you see a big smile on my face, this is my first client event I've done in literally 22 months. So I'm actually more excited to be here than do the panel. I'm just excited to meet everyone. But I think the reality is that as Nabil talked about, I mean, it's hard to follow what Emirates has done. By the way, my last flight in March 1st was on an Emirates flight, and my first flight on Sunday was Emirates. So it's a very big part of what we do. It's we don't think about that. But behind what Nabil has said and what Mohammed has said, there has to be a financial system, right? So, opening LCs, or putting guarantees in place. And as a bank, we have been working on sort of this digital transformation. So be it digital banking, even as simple as a digital signatory, right? We do it, in everyday lives. If you're signing a lease, a house lease, you can do a DocuSign. But from the bank's perspective, we hadn't crossed over those because there was a lot of legal elements of it that we hadn't done. But suddenly when we realized in March, when the whole world shut down, but the logistics and the supply chain had to continue because people had to eat.
To go to hyperspeed.
Absolutely. I think we are very proud that we were able to actually move forward. So working from home was one part of it. We also had many of our teams sitting in our processing centers in Chennai, in China, who are continuing to go to the office. So we have about 80,000 people. By the end of March, we had about 75% working from home.
Did you pivot to immediately to using Microsoft's MS Teams
yes.
to be able to do that work from home?
Absolutely. And we've also worked with Microsoft over this COVID period to actually upgrade and get onto the cloud. So we turbocharged a lot of the initiatives that were nice to have 2 years ago, which became a need to have, last week, right? But for us, it's really about keeping the financial system open. So it was about how do we change, how do we issue LCs from paper formats to be digital, how do we get signatories without people have to physically go into the bank. We're all used to going to a branch. So we feel that we've played some small part in it, and I guess we'll talk about it a little bit later. But just in connection with what we're saying, I think the banking system did play a very important role, not just Standard Chartered. I think the global financial system played a very critical role because the masks could not have moved from China to wherever else for free, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was far from free.
Yeah.
I was doing the processing. Sorry.
So let's flash forward to today really quickly. We are at a crisis point in the supply chain and the way the supply chain works. I was reading a fascinating story in the Wall Street Journal the other day. Nike was being criticized for why they're not supplying shoes in the U.S. market, and are they stuck on container ships? Where are they? Well, it's, as it turns out, all of Nike's employees in the Philippines who make the shoes went home to their local districts way out in the hinterland of the Philippines during COVID, and they haven't come back to work. So there's no production.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just have to do with the transportation. It's the manufacturing. It's everything. So when's this going to be resolved? What's it going to take? Those are the sort of the crux of the questions I want to focus on right at the moment. What's it going to take? When are we going to see a change?
I mean, that's $1 million question, you know. I mean, it's.
Everybody here in the room wants to bank on what you have to say.
Wow.
And
Yeah, I mean, look, it's obviously, I think the whole supply chain, as you rightly mentioned, has been completely disrupted now, and including, of course, the manufacturing houses. And you know, the way I see it with maritime today, the challenges that they face, actually, and we all know, like today, West Coast, USA is really struggling. You have more than almost 70 vessels still in sea waiting to be sort of offloading cargo. There's major shortage of containers that needs to be available. So even if the production is out there, you still don't have the means or the seamless means that you used to have pre-pandemic to be able to move things.
But the truckers aren't there.
And the
train
truckers are not
railroads
there.
aren't there.
Absolutely.
Nothing. Every single point in the supply chain is at a breaking crisis point.
Absolutely. I think, you know, I guess the biggest challenge is that, you know, with the disruption of the people actually and the lockdown that has happened in a lot of the manufacturing world, that has a huge impact. So just, you know, by getting even the people back again to start manufacturing, that isn't just going to resolve the matter, because again, the backlog is so huge now, and being able to sort of even produce fast enough. I mean, I realize there's certain manufacturers in China who've done the production, but they're stuck because they have to now put all of that production in storage because there isn't enough containers. And there isn't enough containers, and then there isn't enough even ships to put the containers on.
And there are not enough Boeing airplanes to get all that product.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
Fly on Emirates or around the world.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, so if I could just add on, please. I think there's a couple of things that's happening here. There's a timing issue, right? So in the beginning, when we were able to move stuff, there was a glut of supply, right? But suddenly demand fell off the cliff. Then as the vaccinations kicked in, the rates went up, economies started opening up, you saw everybody consuming at the same time. Yesterday's inflation results for the US is probably one of the highest in, I don't know, maybe
6 point something.
yeah, but in 20 or 30 years. And that's just because it's what they say is a confluence of all issues coming together. I really think it's a timing issue. I've grown up most of my life in Africa. I've worked in Nigeria. I've worked in Tanzania. We have the vessels lined up for 20 nautical miles. But guess what? Things work out eventually, you know, and that's because of different issues. So even in this case, I think as the demand catches up, and as I think the surplus cash that many people have been sitting on because we've not been going on holidays, we've not had the, you know, sort of the excess spend, I think that it'll come down. In the US, there's a lot of cash in the system, right? So, you know, people are doing that, but it's when, that's the $1 million question. And it's how patient. And a quick story just on the drivers. In the UK, I'm based in London, we had a fuel shortage. Actually, if you see, it was not really a fuel, it's not a petrol product shortage, it was a usage shortage. There was a leak of some information, rumor. So where on average a consumer would spend £30 to fill their car up on a weekly basis, they heard the rumor, they panicked, and they went and filled £80. It became. So suddenly, all the gas stations would have a normal, they would keep the capacity at 40%, because why should they have extra capacity sitting in the tanks? When that finished, then the shortage of drivers kicked in, right? Which was then a real issue with Brexit. So it's a vicious circle that's happening, especially when it all happens together. And I think that's what we're seeing right now with the supply supply shortages.
Let me just, sorry.
Let's jump in, and then
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to you, Mohammed.
Just linked to that, I think in addition to timeliness, it's the speed at which also behavior is changing. So one key learning from the pandemic was agility and our ability to literally think on our feet and change in a timely manner. And as backlogs clear up and as we try and meet up with people's demands, if they put on the request a few months ago, by the time it gets to their doorsteps or to their shelves, etc., they will want something else. And that's where sustainability also has played a very key role, in addition, along the digitization. We've seen our clients now talk sustainability front and center. It's core to everything that they think about. A couple of years ago, it was just kind of a niche word, something nice to have, but now it's become increasingly mainstream. And that also reflects people's conscious behavior now. Everything's around values. Whether it's employees, whether it's buyers, whether it's businesses and the governments now. So sustainability, is, and I'm sure you've seen that, and the sustainability of these supply chains and their ability to remain going, is something definitely to be mindful of.
So Mohammed, last 20, 30 years, maybe 20 years, just in time was the mantra of everything in the manufacturing supply chain world. Do we jump? Are we going to jump forward in what you do around the world to something? I mean, I've been to your logistics centers and I see the way you stockpile and things don't sit there for more than a couple days before they get transferred out to where they're supposed to go. Are we going to go to something else other than just in time, or does just in time come back?
Well, before I get to that point, let me just address the point before. All of what the dear panelists said, I agree with, but I would like to add another point to it. We were just asked to arrange a container from China to the UK. The usual price of that container was $1,800. They quoted us $22,000. Yeah. So somebody here in the chain is making a lot of money. Yeah. And here is the problem, right? So while you can implement a lot of issues and you can implement a lot of solutions, but there's got to be a willingness from the other side to go along with this. When you're seeing margins of this proportion, there are vested interests to prolong this. And this is, unfortunately, the reality, the crux of the issue. Now, will things normalize? Of course they will. Will they ever come back to the pre-prices? I don't believe so, right? But this has set a new reality, a new base, where it's been demonstrated what people are willing and capable of paying. And once that is proven to people, it's very hard to take them back to square one. Yeah. It's unlikely to happen. Coming to your question, now, what I've realized is that really in history is like a pendulum. We go from one theory, it doesn't work, to another one, and then we go back, and then we go back and forth and back and forth. At one stage, I remember when I was in university, it was all about globalization, about how great it is and how amazing it is and what opportunities. What you're seeing today, the problems of supply chain, is purely because of globalization. Now we're going back to nationalization, going smaller, going from macroeconomics to micromanagement, going from mega factories to smaller factories where you're closer to the market, reducing lead times. So I think there will be a fundamental shift in the way companies, organizations structure themselves going forward. I think you'll start to see more and more localized. You'll start to see more and more smaller plants. And it's not just a logistics issue. You look at, for example, what's happening in the GCC. You look at what's happening in Europe with Brexit. You have tariffs coming in. I don't know, every day some new policy comes in, today here. And you all know that in business, the most important thing is consistency and predictability. As long as this is not there, it makes financing your job all the more difficult. So one of the best ways, even though it may not be the most efficient, is to localize. And again, food, you're seeing governments around the world creating food safety. What is the point of having food safety if you can't access it? And that's what I was saying to some of my friends early on. I was saying going and buying massive land banks in Africa or any other place is great. But the minute there's a crisis, no, exactly. The minute this happened with India many, many years ago. They put a ban on rice because there was a shortage of rice in India. And they said, you know what? Yeah, you can own it, but you can't sell it domestically. So there goes your food safety. So if you really, really want to have security, you have to be in control of it. It's the same thing with supply chain. It's the same thing with anything. If you want to outsource it, especially to outside other countries, you're prone to different external shocks, which you don't know where to come from. I mean, it could be supply chain issues, it could be politics, it could be, or whatever it could be. So ultimately, I think, Danny, going forward, you're going to start seeing a lot of investment coming into national production. I mean, you're seeing it in UAE, Abu Dhabi, ADQ in particular, is very aggressive in setting up vertical farms and local manufacturing. You're seeing it. You see the government all of a sudden, because of the pandemic, we are seeing that there's a very different point of view on supply chain, where even the highest levels of leadership are talking supply chain. This was not the case pre-pandemic. So with all of this, I think there will be a fundamental shift in the way business is done, which is good for companies like us, and it brings new opportunities to the region.
So if I could put a global angle, just the other, I absolutely agree with Mohammed, and the other angle that we're seeing is diversification of your supply chain, right? So we have many of our global corporates sitting here today do have a lot of the eggs in the China basket because it had the efficiencies. We had, you know, from cheap labor to, you know, access to power and everything else.
And
so
a huge market.
And a huge market.
That we want to access.
Absolutely. But those goods, a lot of them were coming out, right, for export. So what we're seeing now is, you know, markets like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia are becoming sort of destinations. So that's one part of it. The second part, you know, the just-in-time, I think initially it was just more now. I think that was the mindset. We've probably moved towards that. But, you know, we're going to have to work with companies like Microsoft, and we're working with other organizations around artificial intelligence, around, you know, in terms of the Internet of Things, you know, to see patterns of buying. I think Amazon does that very, very well. And therefore move a certain line the minute you see the demand sort of dropping with forward-thinking, you know, sort of algorithms. Now, it's happening. It's just maybe we're not seeing it.
Well, this crisis is
yeah, I know, absolutely.
that even faster.
Alibaba launched a product last year in September, a separate line on a sort of a digital factory in terms of exactly using sort of the analogs that I'm talking about. And I can see this taking off for the future and sort of this being there. So, you know, today we may not be sort of very in tune to it ourselves as consumers, but in the back, this is sort of the just in time. It'll be just in time, but it'll be really thinking ahead, trying to predict what we may want as consumers. And for us as a bank, you know, we're working also quite a bit on the blockchain technology. So coming and opening letters of credit and just to make that process easier. So we did a sort of a launch of one specific product in Asia between two countries. We cut down the processing time from 4 days to 7 hours. And I think this is where, you know, the whole world is going to be moving to. So I think we just need to be prepared for stuff like that.
I want to give a little chance for the audience to say a few things, but I want to give Shada one last opportunity to say a word about the supply chain becoming greener and more sustainable. You started touching on it, but say a few more words about that.
So, so technology and innovation and other people, even in the renewable energy space, are going to have a very big role to play. They have been, and a bigger helping hand, because everyone will need to ensure that every piece and every part of the value chain contributes significantly towards ensuring, you know, the end product is sustainable. And along the lines, you know, the lifelines will also have to play a big role, like the financial institutions, you know, the logistics, etc., to ensure that they are playing their role, that they're very equipped from a products and services perspective to that, not in a tick in the box, but that it's genuinely sustainable and comes from sustainable purposes. As Standard Chartered, we have been playing a very big role in that space. We do offer our clients now working capital facilities that are sustainable. We do offer and allow sustainable deposits. So we're very equipped now to offer like the conventional and, you know, the sustainable proposition, because that choice also is still important. But it's going to have to come to a point, in my humble opinion, where Sustainability is going to be very mainstream and embedded in everything that we do. Lesson learned from COVID and how everything we do will have an impact at some point on the environment and the world that we live in. And sustainability at the end of the day is about long-termism. So everything that we're doing right now, probably the change is going to be not for the good but for the better.
So we've done Danny, we've done a report with surveys with our multinational clients, which I'm happy to share with everyone here today. I think it's a very important one because we've got feedback directly from everyone in the room, right? And there is a big concern about how far the supply chain goes, right? So I can commit today to say that I will cut, my carbon emissions by X, but the reality is that how far back can you ensure that that's happening? An example we've picked up is that a cotton shirt that we wear today, our studies show that it takes 2,700 liters of water to produce that cotton shirt. So now that's not just from the production part, but that's from growing the cotton to coming in, using the water to convert the seed into the cotton lint and things like that. So there's some really important statistics that come out of it, and the consumer today, especially our younger consumer, which I don't fall in that bracket, are very conscious, right? And you will see situations where they will not buy from a brand that is not able to show that. So a lot of our clients are really now looking back, but we need the financing to help, because a supplier in Bangladesh needs financing to be able to change their generator from heavy fuel to something renewable. They need financing to ensure that the workers are working in a habitable environment, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes a long way. But we'll share that report. I think it's just good to look into it and see the examples and how a lot of our clients are feeling about it, because it is something that everyone is looking at and everyone wants to work towards that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Kuljeet, we're coming into the Dubai Air Show this weekend. In my view, and I've been to many Lugogays, I've been to many Farnboroughs, Dubai Air Show is probably becoming even more important than they are, just because of the way it's positioned in the world today. From Boeing's perspective, and the global supply chain, what you're doing with Emirates, what you're doing with Etihad, with other major customers, say a few words about how you're thinking.
Yeah, look, I think the sustainability agenda is very, very high for us. I mean, if you think about it now, there's just a huge demand for air freight. As the commercial business really died during the pandemic, the part of the business that really picked up was freighters. I was saying to Nabil and to Mohammed earlier that we had a huge demand for conversion, passenger to freighter conversions over that period. But look, the key thing here on sustainability is that every time a new airplane product comes out, it's greener, it's more efficient. So I think that the stats are something like 15 to 25% efficiency every time you take a newer version of an aircraft. I think we also believe that we've undertaken as a company to have all our aircraft 100% capable of flying on sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. But in order for that to be a possibility, it's going to take more than financing from banks and us making that a possibility. It's going to take really concerted governmental action, because governments have got to introduce policy and have got to introduce subsidies to make SAF affordable. Otherwise, operators just aren't going to be able to make it work. And then, it's got to go all the way through the supply chain. We've also undertaken to make our own operations a lot more efficient and to use less carbon in our own operations. And of course, a lot depends on the actual last mile shippers and as well. And I think we attended, the Consul General was there as well, a very interesting panel at the Expo where UPS were really talking about their commitment to sustainability. And so, again, if you go electric on the ground, you go SAF in the air in the short term, as we develop even more advanced types of technology, I think at least you've got a credible pathway to get there, and you've got to start somewhere. clearly. So, so yeah, I think that's all I'd add to that topic. So thank you.
Danny, sorry, just one quick point because I think it's important. So from a bank's perspective, I think we're coming out from COP26, great win behind everybody's back. But I think the financial sector is also under a lot of pressure to ensure that we are committing. So we have committed towards a net zero going to 2030 onwards. But more importantly, which is very critical because we operate in Africa, Asia, Middle East. We can't go into Africa today and switch off all the power and say that we need to convert this to renewable energy tomorrow. It's not possible. But we have committed to $300 billion of green financing or transition financing where we will be working with our clients to say, how do we move you from a coal-fired plant into, be it solar, wind, or any other technology that we see coming in, and how do we work towards that? So that's a very important commitment. Sorry, I forgot to mention, which I think is relevant. Thank you.
All of our banking members are saying similar things and doing some, but Standard & Chartered is really taking a leading role in this. So thank you for raising that and bringing it up, and an opportunity for all of our companies. Ladies and gentlemen, I did not ask the question of Nabil or Pulgit, are there going to be any big announcements at the air show this weekend? So you can't ask that question either. No. But Chris from Ford, from our friends from Honeywell, anybody else want to comment on your aspects of and your experiences from the supply chain crisis that we're going through? Let me grab your mic there. I'll just take it over here. Pass it around. Just a couple really short points, if you don't mind.
Yeah, certainly. Chris Powell from Ford. Yeah, thank you for a fascinating discussion, and Mohammed and Nabil. Thank you also for bringing that human element back and just reminding us of the human challenges that this started with at the start of COVID. I very much agree with what's been discussed, and I'd just like to add on to Mohammed's point about recovery from this current supply chain crisis. I think there's two things to say. The first is, I think just looking at the supply chain side, we're not on the path to recovery yet. This is still a growing crisis. I don't believe we've reached the peak of this supply chain situation. So I think this is going to take longer than maybe we thought. And the second one is, I don't think we're going to recover to the same place. I really agree with Mohammed on this. I think companies are learning right now how to manage within this. We've gone beyond looking at it as a 2-month problem where we just have to pause. We're learning how to manage in this new world, and I think we will take lessons from that learning forward into future operations. So I don't see this going back to exactly where we were. I'm sure we will go to a new place, and I hope that will be a good place as well.
And I think from Honeywell side, I'm responsible for safety and productivity business. So we actually faced challenges from our personal protective equipment as customer for transport and logistics, and also from productivity as a vendor for tools and actually solutions for supply chain. So I would say that we were much closer with our customers from a T&L perspective, and what we saw last year and the trend that is continuing this year also is a demand from customers from transport and logistics towards more flexible solutions and productivity improvement. One of the examples that I can provide that our voice-guided work solution is basically guidance of workers on the ground through voice. Business peaked and tripled within this time. So basically the flexibility and I would say adjustability of supply chain, distribution centers and workers in the ground was one of the keys focus for our customers to hire quickly, to increase capacity, and eventually this kind of flexibility of supply chain is something that we notice within the industry that actually will be a long-term effect.
Behind you, one last comment.
I think as we exchanged notes, and this was a very helpful session, so thank you for arranging this. We are where we are. I think that reality of inflation is reality, and we're seeing it in our financial reflections as well. The question we were asking ourselves and exchanging notes on was, what can we do about it? And one thought that came up is, are we seeing pricing power? Are we at a position where we are able to pass it on to our customers or not? And it was great exchanging notes across industries, automation, Honeywell, GE as well. And I think the reality, especially for this region, is we're not in that position today. But this is a space to watch out for. I think especially with logistics where it is, the situation is such that we will be required to pass it on, and dipping into margins is not going to be sustainable. So that is something which could aggravate inflation, but interesting conversation and good to exchange notes on that point.
Did the banks help you with that?
I think
we'll come and see you later.
We have a couple of plays. I think, yes, if there's cheaper financing for customers and that can help offset some of the inflation cost, why not? Absolutely.
To answer that question, I can tell you on our agency side, where we represent exclusively certain companies, a few of them have already announced a price increase of between 10 to 15%. We're of course trying to convince them not to do it, but they're adamant. So ultimately, it will be passed to the consumers. It always is, unfortunately. That's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
I think if you haven't passed it by now, it's too late to begin.
Yeah. And these are long-term service contracts, right? So you can't renege and have a discussion today. That attempt will exist for new contracts, but yes, more challenging.
Danny, before.
One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. I know I want to give people 5 or 10 minutes for a little networking here at the end, too. Go ahead.
No, so thank you. Great discussion. And maybe just building on a couple of things. So Shell, by the way. So we do scenarios. So we've been doing scenarios for many years. And what we try to do with scenarios, not predict, but to test which world we'll go towards and how our portfolio and our business basically tests against it. But more specifically around, are we out? The answer is no. We did the scenarios last year to say, how is the world coming out of this pandemic? And then on the back of that, what does it mean for commitments towards climate change, Paris, and so on? And the point that you mentioned is globalization. People still want to keep the global, the aspects that we talked about, but the localization is absolutely there. So the question is, how does governments and how do behaviors of governments and society move from, do we want security first? And when we say security, it's health, it's food, it's logistics. Or do we want wealth first? And then how far do you go out there? And then what does that disruptions cause, both domestically and as if the pandemic went in a different way? I mean, you may get wave 3, 4, 5, 6. And same thing is what happened to supply disruptions and how does that impact certain societies, blackouts and so on, and petrol rationing and so on. So that's more of the thing. But I think just going back to the discussion with the gentleman from Boeing there, I think whatever way we're going to go from a sustainability, it has to be done as a collective. You can't expect just companies on their own or governments on their own or manufacturers or suppliers or vendors. I think that's probably where, if we've learned anything, and that's how we're going to move towards it, is that we're going to work together to say, does my sustainable aviation fuel work in your machine? Because then Emirates can fly it, then we can get the banks to sign it off. I think that's the collaboration that we need to really go into it. And what does Microsoft give in terms of solutions to help enable all this transaction? And then the check that you probably expect us not to sign as we before go out is going to look like. But I think that's the reality. And then the question becomes COP26, and we come out of that, and hopefully COP28 here, inshallah. And I think the question is the so what? How does government step into providing that sphere? I think in Europe and parts of it's very much the individual societies pushing it. I think this part of the world is going to be more on it's government that needs to push it. Back to the consumer part. I mean, just give you one example. Is back to price elasticity. Today, if you go to a Shell petrol station in the Netherlands, you have the option, by the press of a button, to say, I want to offset the tank that what I've filled my fuel, whether 30 pounds or 100 or 80 pounds, whatever that is. But you can do that, and it's an option that the consumer is taking, and you pay an extra pence or 1 cent, euro cents to do that. What we've seen is there's a huge pickup. So there's the part of the voluntary that Shadow's talking about. That is actually significant. We're talking about almost 25-30% uptick in less than a year. And so let's not forget how much is the individual willing to pay for the sustainability part. I think you're absolutely right. The boats left the station 10 times fold in the logistics, but that's the consumer is going to pay for it.
Just to add something to that, approximately 15 years ago, maybe a bit less, we, along with McDonald's, started to experiment on going green energy, fuel. So what we did was that we go to all the franchisees, we pick up the leftover from the fries. Okay? Yes, exactly. And we process it, and that's what we actually use in our McDonald's fleets. So we've been a green company, Danny, for quite some time ahead of the curve.
I know you have.
Exactly, all right. With regard, again, to your point about global localization, as you're saying, you have to also realize that online shopping has dramatically jumped during the pandemic. Right. And that, again, has changed the way things work. For one thing, online shopping, people expect immediate service, immediate delivery. That means you have to be closer to the base. But more so, what online shopping has done is that customers want more specialization and more fit for purpose. So that, again, if you want to keep customizing products more and more to meet a certain group of individuals, you cannot do it in a mass production, which again leads to the process. What I'm saying is making it smaller, making it more agile, making it quicker and faster, and being able to service the client faster. So there are many forces which are working towards moving towards more of a localized system versus the traditional make one huge factory and start dishing out millions of products and supply their entire one part of the planet. So I think with all these forces coming in, of course, pushed by the pandemic, we're going to see a very different world going forward in the way supply chain is run, the way manufacturing is done, the way companies are going to start splitting up and going smaller and smaller to be able to do exactly the same thing. So it's going to be an exciting world, Danny.
Mohammed, thank you. Outstanding way to sort of sum it up, and I'm going to turn it over to Saif for the last word here.
Yeah, I was going to say Ali earned his lunch pretty well because he summarized everything for you. We may have to give him an extra dessert or something. But seriously, I think it's an absolute honor and a pleasure to have this luncheon today. For all of you all to take the time to join us. Very important topic. I don't think we've even touched the surface of it, but I think there's good discussion points that hopefully you all go back and it sparks something, or it already has, and we can sort of pick it up from there. I think it's really critical for for our planet, in the future. We may not be here, but it will be catastrophical if what we went through over the 18 months is the start of it. Chris, I want to be a bit controversial. I believe in human beings being very simple. I think things will go back to normal, but we're recording it. Maybe we'll check this again in 12 months' time. I do think humans are creatures of habit, and I think we're going to creep back. But anyway, I'm happy to be wrong. But thank you very much. Thank you, Danny, for hosting this. Really appreciate it. Sure. And to my fellow panelists, thank you very much.
Thanks to the Standard and Chartered team. And please, we will get that study out, roll it to everyone here in the group, and an opportunity for some networking. If you walk away with a couple business cards that you follow up with some business connections, it's a really, really important outcome for today's session. So thanks again to Rola and her team at Standard and Chartered for hosting today's event. Thank you.